January 14th, 1945, Vistula River near the Magnusiu bridgehead, Poland. The night smelled of creosote and snow. Wind came hard off the Vistula, scouring the ice-crusted reeds and rattling the signal masts like bones in a tin can. Beyond the freight yard lamps, the river bridge was a black ribcage against a bruised sky, until the first orange tongue of flame licked up from the far trestle and turned the darkness living. Captain Alexei Morozov didn't look away. He stood on the catwalk of locomotive 9-173, one hand wrapped in an oily rag around the rail, the other cupping a cigarette he never lit. His breath fogged the air, drifting into the steam that bled from safety valves. Down on the ballast, men shouted through scarves and smoke as they manhandled hose couplings into iron jaws and bolted them to the pump manifolds welded along the tender's flanks. The engine, a soot-black 010 freight brute with the big shoulders of a plough ox, had been rebuilt twice since Stalingrad. Now it wore a strange armour, squared plating along the cab, wire mesh over the windows, and two squat nozzles on swivelling mounts like the snouts of metal boars. "Captain!" Senior Sergeant Viktor Petrov climbed the ladder fast, the lantern on his chest swinging light across the boiler bands. Sabotage team set the western trestle alight. Fuel seeped from a ruptured tank car before they blew the drain. "If that wind holds, sir." "It will take the whole span," Morozov finished. The wind snapped his greatcoat. His eyes never left the fire. It was running now, fat and lively, licking along soaked timbers, finding gaps, finding breath. Far beyond, the ice on the river groaned like a ship's hull. "Where are my lines?" "Line 1 from the spring tower is charged. Line 2 from the yard cisterns in 5 minutes. Foam compound warmed, agitators turning Petrov swallowed. Air reconnaissance report Stukas at Tomashov. If they come at dawn." "They won't need to," said Lieutenant Irina Volkov, appearing at Petrov's shoulder with a field telephone tucked under one arm and a coil of signal wire across her back. Her cheeks were raw beneath a salt of cinders. The wool scarf at her throat was freckled with sparks. "German artillery has the far abutment registered. First ranging shots came in 10 minutes ago. We'll be bracketed as soon as we show on the span." "Then we don't show," Morozov said, finally turning. Up close his eyes were pale and tired, the colour of ashes. "We move. If we stop, we burn. If we creep, we are destroyed. We run." Volkov's mouth hardened. "Yes, comrade captain." A bell clanged down the train as the fire train, the men's name for it, came alive in fits and starts. 2 water tenders sloshing 160 tons of river and yard cistern in their bellies, a foam tank car with a welded hose house, a flat car stacked with sand sacks, 2 gondolas tarped tight around ammunition crates for the forward cause, and at the tail an ancient brake van stuffed with medics, stretchers, and nervous silence. The pump engines coughed, caught, and settled into a bass thrum that rattled the rivets. Steam lifted from valve stems in little sighs, and the locomotive's big driver wheels snicked slowly, then stopped, eager. On the opposite bank, the flames leapt higher as the wind turned hungry. Somewhere in the black wires above the bridge, a broken insulator sang, a thin, maddened whistle. In the east, the night had picked up the faintest grey, a rumour of dawn. "Captain," Petrov said, "if the deck plates go while we're on them, then we aim for the last solid rail and pray we still have it when we get there." Morozov's voice was flat. He flicked his dead cigarette into the cinders, watched it vanish. "Victor, you drive. Keep her on the crown of the rail. If she starts to hunt, you throttle through the sway, not against it." "Aye. Irina." He turned to Volkov. "You're on foam 1. If the main throws heat back into the cab, you drown us and the windows both. Do you understand? Her chin lifted once. I do. A runner pounded up the ballast, hatless and heaving. Order from Corps Rail Command, he barked, thrusting a paper at Morozov. Front-line grenade stocks below 2 hours. Fuel columns stalled on the east approaches. If this bridge goes before we feed the bridgehead, the armour halts. The offensive halts. Morozov didn't take the paper. The ink would freeze before his eyes finished it. He simply nodded to the runner, then leaned into the cab and touched the rim of the speed gauge as if it were the forehead of a horse. "All hands aboard!" he shouted, his voice cutting through hose hiss and pump thunder. "Lock couplings, lash lines, foam crews on mounts, hose teams on catwalk. Sand men to the pilot, throw heavy. We are going to plough fire." Men scrambled, boots thudding the length of the consist, faces ghostly in steam and frost. A young sapper, Misha, whose moustache was more hope than hair, paused on the step beneath Volkov's station and looked at her like a kid peering down from a roof. "Will it hold, Lieutenant?" he blurted. Volkov tugged her gloves tight. "It will hold as long as we make it hold." She touched the coil of wire on her shoulder. "And if it doesn't, you run toward the cold and not the bright. Remember that." He nodded too fast and vanished into steam. Petrov slid into the driver's seat, big hands settling on the throttle and the Johnson bar like a pianist laying claim to a familiar score. He looked sideways once, and Morozov met his eyes. Nothing else needed saying. 3 short, Morozov told the fireman. The whistle shrieked. Once, twice, thrice. He dropped his arm. Petrov eased the throttle. The locomotive answered with a deep, chest-shaking bellow. The couplers took strain one by one, metal kissing metal down the length of the train. The fire train rolled, slow at first, then with the deliberate confidence of something that understood only forward. As they cleared the yard throat and found the straight, the bridge rose before them. Black truss bones shuddering in heat shimmer, deck planks crawling with flame where fuel had soaked and the wind had fed. Artillery found them then, a probing shell that burst short and low on the far bank, kicking river water into steam. Another walked in long, throwing sparks off the steelwork and pelting the locomotive's face with hot grit. Volkov swung her nozzle and trialled a sheet of white across the pilot, foam honeycombing as it met heat, collapsing, flowing, blanketing. Morozov stepped onto the cab's windward running board and hooked his arm through a stanchion. He leaned out into fire smell and river cold and shouted down the length of his own machine. "Now!" Petrov answered with steel. The fire train lunged. Steam and foam and snow and cinder collapsed together into one grinding, howling momentum, and the world narrowed to 2 rails that ran out over black water and into a furnace door. They hit the span at 30 kilometers an hour and accelerating. The instant the fire train struck the bridge, the air changed, no longer cold, no longer clean. It was heat and ash and roaring colour. The trestle timbers burned like matchsticks under the wind. Tar and pitch dripped from the rails in glowing tears. Every inch of metal groaned. The bridge flexed beneath the weight of the locomotive, rivets popping like rifle fire. From the cab, Viktor Petrov could barely see 10 meters ahead. The smoke pressed low and heavy, thick enough to taste, a mixture of creosote and cordite. He pushed the throttle another notch forward. "Speed, Captain!" he shouted through the storm. "Any slower and she'll sink the rails." "Hold your nerve!" Morozov roared back, gripping the grab bar with both hands. His face was red from the blast furnace heat. Sparks clung to his coat like fireflies. Lieutenant Volkov, half out of her side window, aimed her foam nozzle down onto the rails. The hose bucked in her grip like a living thing, spraying a thick white curtain that sizzled as it hit the wood. "Foam steady," she yelled. "Keep it thick! Keep it flowing!" The forward car was already blazing, flames crawling up the tarpaulin covering the ammunition crates. A sapper leapt onto the flat car roof, swinging a sandbag over his shoulder. He dumped it onto the flames, vanished in smoke, then reappeared, coughing, his eyebrows gone but his grin wild. "Still here!" he shouted hoarsely. "Still throwing!" Below, through the gaps in the timbers, the Vistula glowed with firelight. Pieces of burning wood fell into the black water and hissed into steam. Shells from the far bank screamed overhead, exploding on the ice with deep, echoing cracks. The Germans had sighted the bridge now. Tracer fire whipped across the river, green and red lines slicing the darkness. Bullets sparked against the steel girders, pinging like angry insects. One ripped through the cab window, shattered glass into the air. Volkov ducked instinctively, then turned back to her hose without hesitation. 200 meters, Petrov called out, straining at the throttle. Morozov climbed half out onto the running board, eyes fixed ahead. Through the maelstrom he could just make out the end of the bridge, the last section, already half on fire. Beyond it, the open rail curved away into safety and darkness. "Push her, Victor!" he bellowed. "Push her till she screams!" The great locomotive roared, pistons hammering like cannon. Its iron wheels bit through melting tar and fire, throwing sparks as tall as men. Foam poured from the nozzles, white over orange, hissing into clouds that smelled of chemicals and death. Halfway across, the forward rail twisted under the heat. The locomotive lurched, left wheels lifting, then slamming back down. The bridge howled like a living creature. Steel screamed. The sapper on the flat car slipped, fell to one knee, but didn't stop swinging his sandbag. "Deck plates failing," Volkov yelled, eyes wide. "Then drive through them!" Morozov shouted. "We're not stopping here!" Petrov didn't answer. His jaw was set, his hands white on the levers. The pressure gauge quivered at its limit. And then light. Not fire, but moonlight, pale and clean. It flashed through the cab window as they broke from the smoke at the far end of the bridge. Behind them, the inferno still burned, but ahead lay open rail and cold night. The train thundered off the trestle just as a shell found its mark. A flash, white and blinding, and the middle span of the bridge disappeared in a roar that shook the ground. Debris rained down into the river. The locomotive rocked from the blast, nearly leaving the track. Petrov fought the brake lever with both arms. The fire train skidded, groaning, sparks showering from the wheels. When it finally stopped, they were 200 meters beyond the bridge. The fire behind them burned brighter than dawn. No one spoke for a long time. Only the hiss of cooling metal and the distant pop of burning timbers broke the silence. Morozov climbed down from the cab. His boots crunched on the snow. He turned back toward the ruined bridge, its twisted skeleton glowing against the night. He exhaled once, long and slow. "We made it," he said quietly. "By fire, we made it." Volkov wiped her face with a gloved hand. "And the bridge?" Morozov shook his head. "Gone." "Then we're the last to ever cross it," she said. Behind them, the ammunition cars still steamed from heat and foam. The pumps coughed, then died. In the sudden quiet, the men began to laugh, weak, incredulous laughter that had no joy in it, only relief. The fire train had done the impossible. They had carried their cargo, and the flame, across a dying bridge to keep an army alive. But the night wasn't over. Far down the line, another glow was rising, this one too steady, too bright to be fire. Morozov frowned. "Those aren't flames," he murmured. "Those are headlights." The light ahead wasn't flicker, it was rhythm. Headlights, 4, maybe 5, bouncing in the distance and coming fast. The sound reached them next, a metallic thunder layered over the hiss of snow. "Engines!" Petrov said. "Not ours," Volkov answered. Morozov swung his binoculars up, though the lenses were already speckled with soot. Through the haze of smoke and drifting ash, he caught the outlines of shapes he didn't want to see. Flat noses, low silhouettes, sharp exhaust bursts that beat the air like drums. German armoured cars. "They must have followed the blaze," he muttered. "They'll want to finish the bridge, and whoever crossed it." The men in the rear cars had already seen the glare. The line of trucks and flatbeds behind the locomotive rippled with sudden motion. Soldiers running, rifles coming off shoulders, someone shouting to unhook the ammunition wagons. Petrov's hand hovered over the throttle. "Orders?" Morozov's eyes flicked from the ruined bridge to the enemy lights and back. The bridge was collapsing behind them. The Vistula span hissed as its hot girders met the freezing river. There was nowhere to retreat. "Victor," he said quietly, "we're going forward. We block the line at the switchyard. We hold them long enough to dump the cargo. That's suicide. It's time bought." He turned to Volkov. "Signal the yard. Tell them the bridge is down, the train's alive, and we're bringing the last of the ammunition in under pursuit." Volkov hesitated only long enough to swallow the taste of smoke in her throat. Then she cranked the field telephone generator. "Yard command, this is fire train 9-173, over. Bridge destroyed, train intact, enemy armour in pursuit. Request clearance and covering artillery on the western embankment." Static, then a crackle of a voice. "Acknowledged, 9-173. You get here, and we'll light the river for them." Morozov gave a short nod. "Good." Petrov cracked the throttle open, just enough to make the big locomotive quiver. "Pressure's still high," he said. "Boiler's angry." "Then let her be angry." The wheels bit into the snow-caked rail, and the fire train began to move again, slower now, wounded, trailing a cloud of steam and smoke that gleamed faintly orange from the burning bridge behind. The German lights multiplied, spreading along the valley road. "Range?" Morozov asked. Volkov lowered the binoculars. "A kilometre, maybe less." He turned to the fireman. "Open the rear water valve. Flood the track as we go. Ice it solid." The man blinked. "Sir?" "They'll try to chase with wheels. Give them ice." The valve clanked open. Behind the train, water poured from the tender, freezing in a thin mirror over the steel. The locomotive groaned as it picked up speed. The cab shook with every uneven rail joint. The men were too tired to talk now. Only the rhythm of the wheels and the distant gunfire filled the night. Then the first shell came in. It burst short and high, showering them with shards of gravel. Another hit closer, throwing a plume of snow and dirt against the tender. Volkov grabbed the edge of the cab and steadied herself. "They've got range." "Then we don't give them a target," Morozov said. "Cut lanterns." No sparks from the stack. Petrov reached for the damper lever and choked the firebox, reducing the exhaust plume to a dull red shimmer. The world outside went dark again, lit only by the ghostly glow of the snow and the steady pulse of artillery behind. They ran blind for 10 more minutes before the line curved west and the dim outlines of the Magnusiu yard appeared through the drifting snow. Searchlights snapped on, sweeping the approach. A line of Polish infantry waved from the siding, flares burning bright red in their hands. Someone signalled frantically. Morozov stepped out onto the running board and bellowed forward, his voice almost lost in the roar of the brakes. "Dump the ammo cars on track 2, uncouple the rest." Sparks cascaded from the wheels as the train skidded to a halt. The yard crew swarmed them, shouting over the din, uncoupling latches, throwing switches. Volkov jumped down, stumbling on the cinders, and turned to see the bridge in the distance, what was left of it, a column of smoke rising against the first light of dawn. "Captain!" Petrov's voice cut through. "They're still coming!" Across the frozen plain, the German armoured column broke through the last of the trees. 5 half-tracks, snow plumes billowing behind them. The distance closed fast. Morozov took one look, then shouted to the signal tower, "Light the river! Fire Mission 7! The answer came a moment later as the ground shuddered. From the far side of the yard, batteries of Soviet howitzers opened fire, their barrels spitting flame into the dawn. The shells screamed over the train and fell among the German column. The first impact threw a tankette sideways, flipping it into the snow. The next landed square on the road, a blossom of fire and mud. Volkov watched, frozen, as the explosions marched closer and closer until one round found the bridge ruins, and the entire span, what remained of it, erupted again in a blast of white and red that lit the valley like sunrise. The shockwave rolled across the yard, flattening the smoke into long banners that drifted west. Then silence. Petrov leaned out the cab window. "That was for Stalingrad," he said softly. Morozov didn't answer. He was watching the horizon where the fire still glowed faintly. They had crossed through one inferno to make another. But the road to the front was open again, and the bridgehead would live. He climbed down at last, boots sinking into snow that was half ash, and turned to Volkov. "Send the report," he said quietly. "Tell them the line is clear." Volkov nodded. "And the fire train?" He gave the faintest of smiles. "Still burning, Lieutenant. Always burning. Dawn, Magneso rail yard, Poland. The sky above the yard was pale grey, streaked with smoke that hung low over the frozen valley. The air smelled of iron and ash. Every surface, rail, shovel and helmet, glowed faintly red with reflected firelight from the still burning bridge in the distance. Men worked silently now. Sappers unloaded the ammunition cars by hand, passing crates along human chains into the waiting trucks. Others hacked at ice with picks to free frozen couplings. The wind carried only the hiss of steam and the clank of tools against steel. Captain Alexei Morozov stood on the platform beside his battered locomotive. The engine's black paint was blistered, the number plates half melted. A long gash ran along the right-hand water tender where shrapnel had torn through the metal skin. Yet the wheels still stood true on the rails, and the boiler ticked with life. Lieutenant Irina Volkov joined him, her scarf pulled up to her chin. She carried a clipboard slick with soot. "Bridge Command confirmed your report," she said quietly. "The crossing's gone. They're already moving to lay a new span upstream." Morozov nodded without looking at her. "They'll need 2 weeks, maybe 3, if the ice holds. They say the front will keep advancing because of what you brought tonight." He finally turned, his eyes distant. Then it was worth every rivet. Behind them, Petrov climbed down from the cab, wiping his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth. "Boiler's stable," he said. "But she's done, Captain." Firebox cracked, feed lines leaking at the flange. Morozov ran a hand along the side of the locomotive, feeling the warmth fade beneath his palm. "She's earned her rest." A young corporal approached, boots crunching in the snow. "Comrade Captain," he said, saluting awkwardly. "Command wants to move the engine off the main line. Shall we tow her to the dead track?" Morozov hesitated. "No," he said after a moment. "Leave her here till the ice melts. Let the men see her when they pass." The corporal nodded and left. Volkov glanced toward the east, where the first faint sunlight bled through the smoke. You think they'll remember it? The bridge? Morozov asked. The train, she said. What we did. He smiled, thin and weary. They'll remember the supplies, the shells, the victory. Not the fire that carried it. From the river came the groan of ice breaking. The wind shifted, sending a last wave of smoke over the yard. For a heartbeat, it seemed the entire landscape was breathing, rails exhaling steam, fires sighing in the wind, men moving like shadows through fog. Morozov climbed into the cab one final time. The brass of the throttle was still warm. He pressed his glove to the metal, then pulled the whistle cord once, a single low note that rolled across the valley like a farewell. The soldiers stopped what they were doing and turned toward the sound. Even the artillery crews along the embankment looked up. The whistle faded slowly, swallowed by the wind. Petrov stepped back, watching his captain descend. She sounds tired, he said. So are we, Morozov replied. They stood together in silence, watching the snow begin again, light flakes drifting down to settle on twisted rails and scorched wood. Somewhere far off, another locomotive called, a thin echo that sounded almost like an answer. Volkov closed her notebook and tucked it under her arm. Orders for you to report to Corps headquarters by evening, she said. They want a full account. Morozov looked towards the river, where smoke still curled from the ruins of the bridge. Then let's give them one worth writing down. He started walking toward the command tent, boots cutting tracks in the new snow. Behind him, the fire train stood motionless on the main line, steam drifting from her vents in slow, lazy ribbons. She looked less like a machine now, and more like something alive, breathing, waiting, remembering. And as the light strengthened, the frost on her side plates began to melt, tracing pale streaks down her steel skin, like tears,